Apologies. That might make a difference. Do you want me to kick off again?
Yes, thank you.
All right, that was a good beginning. All right. Apologies for my technical inefficiencies, everybody. I welcome everybody to the PAR today. It's just after 4 minutes past 1. I'll start by asking firstly if we have any apologies. If not, then we'll move on to agenda item 2. Any declarations of interest? No, thank you. That being the case, we'll now move on to agenda item 3, confirmation of the previous minutes. Before we look at the public minutes, I'd just like to check whether anybody has any specific items that they wish to talk to in the public excluded minutes.
What page is that?
Public excluded minutes in my document starts on page 43.
We've got that.
Mhm. Anything to address? Excellent, thank you. That being the case, if I could please have a mover and a seconder for accepting the public excluded minutes taken as read and added as agenda item 3.2. Mover, Councillor Hopkins, seconder, Councillor Ryan. Thank you. That being the case, we'll now revert back to section 3.1, confirmation of the previous meeting's public minutes, which you will find beginning on page 7. Any feedback or questions? Councillor Hopkins.
Mr. Chair, I'm puzzled. The second paragraph under 4.1 talks about a member suggesting the softening of some words, for example, replacing will with may. Now, I definitely and clearly recall the planning manager saying, yes, that change could be made. The minutes don't note that, but they go on to say there was no ruling from the chair in response to these suggestions. My question is, why do the minutes of a meeting include reference to something that didn't happen? You didn't rule, so why on earth is that mentioned in the minutes? And when was this matter adjudicated? Was it adjudicated outside the meeting?
No, there was nothing adjudicated outside of the meeting. There was a discussion about whether we collectively agreed that we
A discussion with whom?
Sorry, there was a discussion in the meeting about whether we all agreed with will or may, and my understanding was that we didn't come to an agreed resolution that we would replace the words.
Well, there's a reference later on, and I don't recall you saying accepting that RCP 8.5 may not be correct, but that was a matter that was also discussed and agreed informally. And the point is that some of the conversations we had that day, as with other meetings, members agree by informal consent rather than formal resolution. But I come back to the question that I originally asked. The last sentence on the second paragraph, there was no ruling from the chair in response. If it didn't happen, why is it in the minutes?
Then we can have that removed from the minutes. If there was no ruling, we can have that comment removed from the minutes. With regard to your second point around RCP 8.5, I can distinctly remember saying in the session that none of this was certain, and it could well be that RCP 8.5 was not going to be the desired outcome, nor could 4.5 be. But I also carried on in the discussion and said that the purpose of the presentation at that meeting was not to debate whether it was RCP 4.5 or RCP 8.5, but to agree the framework.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, I'm happy to move the confirmation of the minutes with that amendment as you've suggested, i.e. the removal of that sentence.
Are there any other comments? If not, do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Blackwell, thank you. We'll move on now to, sorry, can I put that to the meeting? All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. If we now move to item 4, which the decision reports, and today's item that we're talking to specifically is the Treasury strategy. So, Mr. Hope, would you like to introduce that?
Yeah, certainly I'll start and then probably turn into a bit of a tag team as we move around the room. I think, yeah, this is very much a sort of a status quo recommendation. This is an area that we have been discussing about how we can improve the reporting and monitoring to the committee, and really having probably a better view both across the 12 months and for a period longer than that. So Ms. Nichols might want to talk to that a bit further, but we are looking at changing the focus of some of the finance officers to have a better involvement with some of the units around council, so that we've got a more active discussion about cash flow requirements over the 12-month period, and also looking to have that reflected in the budget, so cash flow planning is easier over the 12-month period, and bringing in some more visual elements into this treasury strategy, so it's a little clearer about what our probably intended borrowing profile is going to be. So it's probably the last time you will see a report in this exact format, and probably something that we will certainly look to do a reasonable amount of work on in the next sort of 4 to 6 weeks, and then might bring a strategy for Q2 earlier to the committee than we have in the past, but really over to Amanda and Ian to talk about any of the aspects of the report they feel need to be emphasised, and then would be happy to answer questions.
So dealing with the report that you've got in front of you, this is basically a requirement of our policy that we present you with a treasury strategy prior to the quarter that it relates to, and you discuss, obtain further information from us as needed, and then approve that treasury strategy. Generally speaking, the treasury strategy is the same from one quarter to the next. If there's any major significant changes from that, then they generally come through with the treasury updates, the quarterly treasury reports that you receive, and also financial updates that you receive at meetings between quarterly update meetings. There are better ways of reporting this, and Amanda may touch on those. We set out the current situation with our investments on page 14. That's not totaled, and it probably should be. But the most important thing, two things, the interest rate mismatch that we've identified some months, perhaps a year ago, changes to the North Otago irrigation loan have mitigated one of the two issues that related to. The NOIC loan is now on a quarterly adjusted interest rate, which will match the LGFA interest rates plus a margin, so that we will always be in a situation where we're covering our costs. The other one to still be dealt with is the Observatory Village loan. And the other thing of note is that since the end of March, we have borrowed a further $4 million from the LGFA. At the end of March, we were matched with the budget amount of borrowings, 38 million. But because of concerns around our dwindling cash during May, the fact that we had a large GST payment to make, the fact that we also expected a lot of creditors' payments to be made in May, and doubt around the repayment of the health company's loan, it seemed prudent to take out further loans. So we have $42 million currently owed to the LGFA. That's all I have to say on that. If you have any questions, now is a good time.
So just on that, Mr. Wells, I'm keen to pick up on that, because when I read it, it did cause me some concern. Previously at PAR meetings, it's been made very, very clear that we do not borrow money for OPEX, and this reads a lot like we have. I'm just wondering whether, one, the terminology is slightly inappropriate, or if that is the case, then is it something that we need to discuss further around cash flow forecasting.
Yeah, cash flow forecasting is something that needs to be addressed further, but no, our borrowings aren't related to OPEX, but as we spend capital, so we are using the bank account, and when we run into a problem with dwindling cash reserves down to capital expenditure, then topping that up with LGFA borrowings can be regarded as funding capital expenditure, in my view at any rate.
So how long did we take that borrowing out for, and have we utilised any of it yet?
So we took as is outlined on page 16, 2 million of it is out to 2028, and 2 million matures in July. And as I've indicated in the report, if we're able, then my intention was to repay a portion of what's due on the 17th of July to avoid paying interest on that when we don't need to. We'll have to borrow it later in 24 because the budget for 23-24 allows for borrowings to increase to $50 million.
Thank you, Mayor Kircher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Obviously, we'd normally have a reasonable size overdraft facility at the bank. Is this being operated in a bit like an overdraft at times, being able to utilise that funding to cover those cash flow challenges that we have from time to time?
So in between any month, any week, we do have the facilities, $1 million with the Carl facility and 250K with the BNZ overdraft. But both of those facilities cost a good deal more than the LGFA. The commercial paper that we have with the LGFA is for much shorter term borrowing. On this occasion, we borrowed in the middle of May. That borrowing matures middle of July, so it's only for 2 months, and we can repay it depending on our circumstances as we approach the middle of July.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I just wonder whether there's needs to be any commentary around the ability to utilise it in that sort of fashion, that it's rather than what most people consider with those loans, which is longer term, that these are short term.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point. I also have had previous discussions with Ms. Nichols about the BNZ Carl facility, and I understand that you're looking at reviewing the appropriateness of that going forward. So perhaps as a part of that, we could talk more about using CP from the LGFA for short-term cash flows.
Yeah, well, I think that's a facility we try to avoid, isn't it? The interest rate is not attractive at all. So yeah, we will look at different options, and there's a bit of terminology and presentation that I think could fix the reporting and understandability of this document a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Hope.
Yeah, just again picking up on the point the Mayor made. I mean, it was traditionally the LGFA did not offer sort of short-term available facilities. It was a change they made probably about 12 months ago. And when they did make that change, yes, we did take the opportunity to restructure our arrangements with the bank and reduce them quite significantly because of the ability to draw on a short-term basis. So, it's positive feedback. I think it's useful feedback that we need to sort of make a bit of differentiation in the report about what is more traditional term borrowing, which the LGFA was set up for, and some of the newer newer offerings that they have, and us taking advantage of those for really a pricing benefit.
Thank you, Councillor McKine.
Yeah, sorry, Paul, you answered some questions that I had the other day. Thank you for that. I still can't get my head around it. So at the moment we owe 42 million, roughly, approximately. That's externally. We have $34 million of lending to irrigation companies, etc., etc. So are we 42 minus 34, or we owe 34 to our own the depreciation accounts or anything else? What is the total number of debt that we owe? So if you pay back $1 million of that we've lent you, does that go against our outside or external or internal borrowing? How does the system work? I can't get my head around it.
I think, yeah, the simplest term is just to look at what's the external, the two numbers you highlighted. So what's the external borrowing and what's the external investments we have, and look at the net of those two. So at the moment, I suppose you could say we've got a net exposure of $10 million in debt with the LGFA. In terms of all the rest of it, how essentially the internal loan schedule and the reserve balances sort of map into the cash management side of things. I think that's given your questions, it's something that I think would need to come back to another workshop and work through that again, because it will be important that there's a good understanding around the table of how that works, because it will be a key discussion point as we develop the financial strategy for the long-term plan and really plan out the elected member, well, the governance team's attitude to debt that we're going to then need to communicate in the long-term plan to the community. So, I suppose it's been in here long enough. Just we'll have the view that the external debt capacity is an incredibly valuable tool for council meeting its community outcomes. So, and then how we reflect that, the impact of that into the rating system. It's important that that relationship is clear. So we need to be able to make that really clear to the governance team, so that we can then make it you're confident talking to the community when they ask questions about it, because it is the way councils finance things is really quite different from a corporate, I suppose a traditional corporate understanding of it. So we'll as I said in your questions on that, we'll find some time to have a bit more of an illustrative session to go through that, so that it is really clear to everyone as we start working on developing the financial strategy.
We had just for reference, we had a planning session yesterday for future paths with the Deputy Chair, Mr. Hope, and Ms. Nichols, and we're trying to make sure that we allocate some spaces going forward for various workshops to help bring everybody up to speed with stuff that might not appear quite so clear. And so on that note, I will also invite any PAR members to put forward any specific areas of interest or topics or workshops that they would like to see us bring to some of those future PAR sessions as well. Appreciate that. Thank you. Any further questions or comments on item 4, the Treasury strategy? Yeah.
Thank you. Look, a couple. On page 14, there's a reference to the interest rates and how they're maybe going higher than 5.5. And you go on to say this emphasises the importance of ensuring that future borrowings are structured appropriately. There's been some discussion about how that might happen today, or some sort of suggestions, but I'm wondering if you're proposing to give us a sort of a more formal formal advice, or more amplified advice as to how they might be structured in future. Other than that, so that's question 1. The other question relates to what's referenced on page 17, I should say. The draft annual plan indicates borrowings during the year will increase by a further 8 million to 50 million. Well, the problem with that is that I would have thought the draft annual plan, which presupposed a borrowing of 8 million, was actually drawn up and sums calculated before you went and borrowed the additional 4. Now, okay, so 2 million of that's going to be repaid in July, fine, but doesn't that perhaps mean that the borrowing should be down to 6 million rather than 8? And perhaps supplementary to that, we get told about borrowing like this after the event. Now, it seems to me the explanations you gave us earlier were that was to cover OPEX, GST and creditors who needed to be paid. That's an OPEX rationale for the 4 million borrowed. Should PAR have the committee have the power to approve such unanticipated unscheduled additional borrowings before they happen, rather than simply learn about them afterwards.
Mr. Hope, did you want to take that?
Well, I think that would be, we need to discuss that, because I suppose we've taken it and all of the policy documents are, when council approves an item to be funded through the annual plan process, and it says that it will be debt funded, that is sufficient authority to go and essentially go into the market to raise the funding to actually then fund that expenditure. So we see the approval takes place at the annual plan and project level rather than individual pieces. But I think what we are recognising is that we need to have a longer term view, so it is more visible to the members of the PAR when additional drawdowns are likely to occur because of the cash flow cycle that we're in. So that, yes, there is greater visibility and awareness and the ability to ask questions ahead of an action being taken, rather than essentially seeing the results of it. So I'm confident in our authority on what we're doing. It's just the visibility for the committee. So, allow you to be proactive and a bit more questioning about what's going on.
And I think maybe just to pick up on that earlier conversation that we had, we could probably get a little bit smarter about some of the terminology that we use, because that will reduce the likelihood of heckles being raised on occasion unnecessarily. I think also just with reference to one of the other comments that you made around the importance of ensuring future borrowings are structured appropriately. I think that goes back to a lot of that goes back to our interest rate risk management strategy, which you can see on page 23 of the report, that talks about having significantly more cover at the front end than going out further in years. And in fact, there's a really, really useful number on that page in the right-hand table second from the bottom, which is the weighted average cost of funds. So even in an interest rate environment at the moment where you're looking at 7.75%, the weighted average cost of our borrowings is 4.61%.
Okay, no, thank you for that. Yes, that is helpful.
Mr.
So
Wells?
what you're saying, therefore, Mr. Chair, perhaps the officers can confirm that, is essentially that forward strategy is expressed at the moment as we currently intend to implement it through the approach taken on the table on page 23.
Correct, and that's our treasury strategy, which has been worked through with Bancorp as our advisors, and I can confirm as a relatively, and I'm sure Ms. Nichols can confirm as a relatively standard treasury risk management approach. Mr. Wells, did you have something further to add?
I was just going to say that although the intention, if we can, will be to repay some of those borrowings in the middle of July, that will only defer the need to borrow the same money back again later in the year to achieve our capital outcomes. So a temporary reprieve and a saving of interest, but that's only a short-term thing.
Councillor McKone.
I think Mr. Wells just answered my question, because I see we've got maturity of 7 million on the 17th of July. So I suppose this can be rolled over when it's required.
Yeah, depending on how much surplus cash we deem that we have on hand, we will repay that down and then redraw in a month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever, as cash flow dictates.
So it strikes me that there's a lot of conversation about cash flow forecasting here today, and I think that when we look at the revamped report, the opportunity to potentially be more transparent or scientific about cash flow forecasting would bode well. Sorry, Councillor Blackwell.
Thank you. Yeah, I echo the comments around cash flow forecasting, particularly now we're in the environment of not being in a net cash position as we perhaps have been in the past. Just had a question regarding external loans and our debt profile and timeline as a net borrower. what would our profile look like without that in the picture, given that we do have a significant capital investment program anyway? How would the timeline look without that? And the rationale for asking that question is, while we are achieving a margin on loans to external parties, or at least that's the intention, it seems to me that if you view the situation holistically, there would be a portion of those funds that we're borrowing at a rate higher than the margin we're achieving. So therefore it would come at a cost to the ratepayer, would it not?
Just jumping all over each other to try and answer that one, Councillor Blaine. But I think that's the issue of the mismatch that we have been talking about. The largest piece where we were, I suppose, out of the money, to use the term, was the North Otago irrigation arrangement, and that's only been for a reasonably limited period of time. With the changes now, that should go back into a positive position. So given that we do have margins on these arrangements, I think at the worst position we probably get to on and it's only on some of the pieces, would be sort of break even or a very small negative for a pretty limited amount of time. We could, again, I think that's something we need to track more closely and take a longer term view of. Really, we're thinking that most of these issues were going to be resolved certainly by the start of the long-term plan, with the repayment of the Three Waters related loans. But now that that's out for another 2 years, so we will have a greater level of indebtedness in the Three Waters area when the debt gets transferred over. And the proposal, and that hasn't been changed under the extended time frame, was that to not, I suppose, distort the debt market, that they would, with each council, come to an arrangement where they'd essentially repay it as the individual council's debts matured, so that they get a profile and they would cover all of the interest costs. So we'd have another, when that happens, we'll have a very big piece that we can ignore because it will be completely matched off by a third party. So how we report that and how we plan for that is something that we're certainly going to have to put our minds to make sure that we've got a good structure that suits the needs of both council and the NTU. We do end up in a cost neutral position, but certainly acknowledge the comments you made. And probably the first one, look, we'd need to do some work about how we can illustrate, I suppose, quantify and then illustrate what would have been like without some of the investing arrangements that we had. Probably goes back to Councillor McCone's question. It's like, we probably would now be reporting a debt position of if all the original arrangements had been in place, the retirement village would still have had life on it. It would have been fully repaid, and KDIC would have been in there somewhere. So we would have had probably $13-14 million of external debt rather than the amount we're talking about at the moment.
Does that address your question, or was the question still partially around what the profile looked like going forward?
I think we've covered off before my question that there needs to be a bit of work in that space. So I'm definitely interested to see what that process delivers. But I think everyone's acknowledging that there is work to be done there, so that's good.
And I think we want this information to be useful to the committee, so we'll start working through some ideas and then probably circulate them informally, just to say, look, this is the kind of thing we're looking at, and then get some feedback on that before we sort of have a wider workshop of the full committee to work through what will be most useful and what. Again, the objective is to allow you to be confident to talk to ratepayers about our financial position, because the public will be very interested in it as well.
And just to reconfirm off the back of that, I also do invite any other sort of special topics that people would like us to consider on some of those future agendas to also be raised. Councillor McCone.
Yeah, so I just think outside the square a bit of what so it's a wish more than anything, or a dream, I suppose, or whatever you want to call it. But if we formed a whole lot of CCOs of what I call outside the council's business as usual infrastructure, will that make the lending and the payback a lot easier with the way the council operates? I know that's a hard question, but
As Nichols is nodding, so I'm passing it.
I was just going to say the LGFA does have the ability to lend direct to CCOs. So there could be an opportunity to look at how those loans are structured more directly if we had like with the CCO, so it didn't have to filter through council at all. So it wouldn't affect council's own debt, but it would obviously the group picture would still be similar.
Would that not also come with an associated credit cost to the CCOs if they weren't able to use our rating?
From my experience with Dunedin City Treasury, which is effectively the bank for Dunedin City Council, so Dunedin City Council doesn't borrow on its own name at all from LGFA, it's all Dunedin City Treasury, and Dunedin City Council is a guarantor, so there is no extra margin for Treasury.
Okay, because that would be something that we'd want to make sure we weren't lining our CCOs up for.
Mr. Chair, I'm happy to move the recommendations.
Excellent, thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Halali, thank you. So with that, could I please ask all those in favour to pass the resolution? Say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Wells. We'll now move forward to agenda item 5, which is 5.1, a risk management update. And again, I invite Mr. Hope to introduce that and then hand over to Ms. Lyons.
And over to Ms. Lyons.
Thank you. So I think it's probably easiest if I talk through the attachments to the paper. So the first attachment is at page 29, and that gives an overview of the key and operational risks. So on that left-hand side, we've got the overview of the key risks. So we've got 17 of those at the moment, and the 2 heat maps at the bottom there show how the scores change from inherent risk scores. So those are imagining we are doing no controlling action, taking no mitigations against those risks. That's our exposure. And moving over to the residual risk scores, which is taking into account all the controls that we do have in place. So you'll see there that there is a drop. So the very high corner in that inherent risk score heat map has 7 risks in there, and we drop to only 1 in that residual risk heat map. The majority of our risks for key risks are sitting in the high rating, which is expected given that they are the key risks to the organisation. There is an overview there of the operational risks as well. So we've got 249 of those documented. There's 1 remaining area that's just close to being finalised, which is the IS department. So that figure will increase going forward. And there's a summary there of out of appetite risk acceptances, which I'll discuss shortly, and risks with significant reduction from inherent to residual score in that operational space, which was a request previously made. The next attachment, which spans 3 pages, is our total key risk register. So the 17 key risks that I just mentioned. Of those, 14 remain from previous quarters, and none of those risk scores changed this quarter. So we've stayed stable across those 14 existing key risks, which is quite positive. On page 33, you'll see the highlighted 3 risks that were added this quarter. So these are new additions to the key risk register. We've got a new risk around district housing, which was discussed and brought up given that obviously for the district to grow and develop, we need to ensure that we've got housing available and affordable for our residents. So that is currently rated as a high risk. A major economic event was also discussed and debated with ELT. So this kind of focuses on what would happen to the district if we lost a major employer and how could council respond to that. So from those discussions, we have noted that we do need to do some work to develop a plan for a response if that was to happen. So again, that is rated as high, and hopefully with the development of that plan, we might be able to reduce that risk down. And the third new risk was a long-term plan risk. So this risk reflects the current position of local government. So it's not unique to just this council, but trying to balance the needs of the district and what we need to incorporate into a meaningful long-term plan versus the restrictions and requirements that are being placed upon us. So that is currently rated as a medium, and I think we've got scope to reduce that risk. And obviously this one's not one that will stay on the register for the long term. We will see that drop off once that long-term plan has been approved. I'll just pause for any questions on those.
Thank you. I was just conferring with Mr. Hope. I think it's great, the work that we're doing around risks. And if I look back, say 12 months ago compared to now, it's amazing what we're pulling together. And it's really exciting that you're moving through the organisation, you know, a lot in terms of managing risk. So just a question for me, one of the most important things about identifying a risk is also identifying a risk owner, because they're the ones who are ultimately going to be responsible for being comfortable about the controls. And so I was just interested why for the housing one, Mr. Hope was named as the owner rather than Mr. Parmalee.
That's because the district housing strategy is being developed in the community development area, which sits with Mr. Hope.
No, I was just going to say flippantly, I think I was out of the room when that one was discussed. I got given the hospital pass, but
Yeah,
no,
okay.
okay, if that was the basis, yes, the your housing strategy is in the community development space, which does fall into areas of responsibility.
Excellent. Thank you both. Councillor Hopkins.
Amelia, thank you very much for this. I suppose, yeah, and I accept the risks, and I accept also that you're right about adding the new ones. What's just become apparent to me is that we appear to be switching, perhaps without clarification or explicitly making it clear, we appear to be switching from risks to us as an entity, as an organisation, to more general risks. And for instance, I would have thought that the long-term plan risk is actually high for us. The major economic event risk is perhaps medium for us, or even low, and the same arguably with housing, significant for the district, but not necessarily for the Waitaki District Council. And I would probably argue that whereas quantifying risks and listing them and assessing them is pretty clear, we also need to be quite clear as to whether the risk is internal or external, or the extent to which it is one or the other. And I probably wouldn't recommend spending an awful lot of time drawing up a plan for the collapse of a major economic entity or business, because our capacity to deal with that, if and when it arose, is pretty limited anyway. We've had a couple of experiences in the time I've been on council, and all we've effectively been able to do is help government agencies help people get new jobs.
Mr. Hope.
Yeah, I'll have a first crack at this one. And I think that's again, it's a demonstration of the evolution of our approach to risk. But these are risks that would have a serious impact on council achieving its wider community outcomes.
Okay.
And if we don't start recognising those, then it shifts the focus. I think you end up being too internally focused rather than having a broader view that we can take actions. Council does have a role to play in actually helping to mitigate these risks for the wider community. No, we don't. We're not the sole owner, and we're not saying that, but it is recognising council has identified this as an outcome, and therefore that you know, things that jeopardise that, we need to recognise it going forward.
So would you, Deputy, hello?
Just wanted to support through the chair, Mr. Hope's comments. I'm really in agreement, and I quite like the integration with the district plan, the long-term plan as well. Also in alignment with our strategic priorities, because that's where we will be able to assess what the impact of our decision making and how we can help support the community on a wider level. So I quite like how the direction of travel that we're heading towards. So thank you.
Councillor McCone.
I'd just like to concur with all that and then just be very mindful that it's for the district and not necessarily for the council. So it's to cover everybody.
Sorry, Councillor Blackler.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd just like to echo the comments as well that this is really great to see and it's developing along really well. So great work. I know I mentioned it last time as well, but I really would like to see a specific risk around coastal erosion. I'm not sure if there's been any further consideration on that, separate to the climate change classification. And then I just had a question on the major fraud perpetration. And I wanted to ask Amanda from, your historical experience with respect to the controls we have in place there. Is that best practice, or is there more we can do in that space, or have you had a chance to take a look at that yet?
Yep, I have a bit of experience as I used to be auditor as well, so I've raised a few controls in the past. We've also recently received our audit findings from last year, so there is a few controls that could be tightened up that would decrease our fraud risk across the board. And it's something that's always ongoing. You want to keep an eye on controls and make sure that, especially through a period of change and stuff, that everything's still happening the way it should be. So yeah, it's something that we're going to be working on a lot in finance in the new financial year, have a refresh fraud training and get the policy out in front of people again. I just think it's an ongoing thing that needs to have a watch over all the time, but your controls in place are fine. Like there's one-up reviews and appropriate systems and controls each step of the way. It's just keeping an eye on those and having oversight over them constantly.
Thank you. Just before I ask for a mover of the minutes, are there any other components that you wish to speak to in the presentation, Ms. Lyons?
There are a couple, yes. So if we just move to the next attachment, which is on page 34, so attachment 4, this gives details of the out of appetite operational risks that have been accepted. So essentially, these are any risks that have been rated medium or above out of those operational risks that have then moved up through the relevant group managers and with ELT to agree that we will accept that actually at present there's either not much we can do to reduce those risks, or to do so would be impractical or not feasible. So there's some rationale provided as to why those have been accepted. And the last page, so page 36, which is attachment 5, gives details of 4 operational risks that have dropped from very high at an inherent rating down to low as a residual rating, which was requested by this committee previously. So we had no risks dropping from very high to very low, and just these 4 that sat very high at an inherent level and down to low at residual, which were again reviewed by ELT to agree that they would agree and confirm the ratings and the controls in place as well.
Thank you very much. And I again would just like to thank you for bringing this report, this component of the report to the committee. So for me, this is one of the most important components of the report for PAR members to be aware of, that we have provided the ELT with the mandates to be able to sign off on these controls. But I think it's very important that we as members of the PAR look at these and check through these, because when a risk's moving from extremely high to low, we need to be confident that the controls that are associated with that make sense. Thank you. Are there any further questions? If not, could I please ask for somebody to move? Councillor Hopkins, somebody second, Councillor Blackler. So on that basis, all those in favour of supporting the recommendation, please say aye. Against? Thank you. That's carried, and thank you, Ms. If we move forward now onto the last agenda item today, agenda item 5.2, which is just a financial summary and overview of position as at end of April. Mr. Wells, Mr. Hope.
Let's go straight to questions.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, a couple. One of them is probably not one, well, one is essentially seeking to have confirmation that we can look at something more closely in the future. But the other is, it is a small matter, but on page 39, under the heading 3, bullet point 2, there's a reference to council implementing a long service leave policy in 2021. Now, I have no recollection of that ever coming before elected members. So can it be a policy? I'm just curious that I don't think we ever voted on that or were asked to. So can somebody clarify that for us, please?
Well, it's an internal policy, so not all. It's a management policy. It's essentially a remuneration and employment policy.
Okay. The other more general question, and this, as I say, I don't want to debate it in the particulars of it today, but there are a variety of references to unexpected and very high increases in valuation of assets, the airport and all sorts of others. I think we're going to have to sit down at some point and really look at this, because it has the potential to completely derail us in terms of imposed costs before we even start to do the things we want to do in any given financial period. So can I just request the chair and perhaps Mr. Hope to commit to a rigorous and more detailed examination of how we might address this, and what, if anything, we can unfund, or what other remedies or approaches we might be able to take to relieve what looks like an increasingly intolerable financial burden.
Yeah, and I think that's can certainly bring that on board. We have the roading revaluation is a major item scheduled for this year, and we also need to do a fair value assessment of particularly the Three Waters assets. So we can bring the results of both of those through to the committee to consider, what essentially start the discussion early about what actions we could take in terms of potentially mitigating the effect, but contrasting that to what's the prudent financial position in terms of the depreciation we require. Yeah, I will do that.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor McCarthy. Just while we were on the leave topic from earlier, I just wanted to ask about the point in here talking about leave entitlements have built up significantly over the past while, and one of the reasons that is expressed for that is because COVID's reduced the ability for people to travel, meaning they had to defer overseas plans. It concerns me somewhat that our people might be saying, if I can't travel overseas, I'm not going to take leave. From my experience, leave is something that's really important for people's mental and physical well-being, full stop. And it would concern me if people are saying, if I can't go overseas, then I'm not going to take leave, because that doesn't give them the break that they kind of need.
Looking at one of them in particular, I think it is not with significant leave balances. I was just going to refer to the, I suppose, as the changing nature of the workforce we have, with an awful, quite a high percentage of the people actually having significant relationships in foreign countries, that planning on taking a significant block of leave, sort of almost the typical number is sort of 6 weeks. That they do sort of build up to that. They are still taking leave along the way, but probably in shorter increments. And I think it's something we'll see more of, is people sort of building up their leave and then it disappearing in reasonably chunky pieces. So, but it is, it's certainly an issue that we do need to be monitoring more closely.
I'm obviously supportive and encouraging of that. I just, again, perhaps the semantics around this could be a little bit better, because it is important that people do take regular breaks. Mayor Kircher.
Just along those lines, Mr. Chair, if ELT considered having a cap on such amounts, because it's a significant risk to us also if leave continues to stack up, and when they do go to take it, then suddenly we've got a huge gap because of some of the positions that we've got. And it's not only as a financial liability, but we actually potentially will lose some key people at times where we may not otherwise want them to be away for periods of time that can't be covered easily.
Yeah, all of the situations I've been aware of, the people that are planning on taking sort of that extended leave have generally given council a long lead-in period, so we have been able to plan for that and make contingencies. But yeah, it certainly did grow over the COVID period, and then with the generally a lot more flexible working arrangements, we're probably seeing less individual days being taken as people are able to arrange their work schedules slightly differently. So I think we'll probably need to come up with a more proactive leave management policy, and then work it through the necessary steps to get sort of good engagement with the employees, so it's
Maybe
sort of acceptable to all parties.
Maybe a good topic for one of our sessions. I'm sorry, Councillor McCone, I was conscious that you had a question.
Yeah, sorry, just to get back to the nitty gritty again, page 38. That's income and expenditure revenue. What guarantee have we got that those grants will stay there? I notice there's $3 million more in grants. And my other question would be, as far as expenditure goes, between roading and waters, there's been almost an overspend of $6 million. I ask why, and or is that the wording as contractors, because the contractors should have tendered and be a price, and that's their problem, not ours.
So far as the grant revenue, if it's not, sorry, if there's any question about its about whether we've earned it or not, then we don't recognise it. It's held as income in advance until such time as we've spent the money, or we have an assurance that there will be no future requirement to pay it back. So only when we know for sure that the income is ours do we record it. And the second question, what was it about capital expenditure?
So the contractors, roading and waters in particular,
sorry, I can't really comment on that, sorry.
The biggest variation was still the response to the flood that we had earlier in the year. That was a $4 million variance by itself. I agree that this work is done at contracted rates, but there also is a variable component in all of the contracts to particularly take care of emergency works and other things. So can get some further information on that, but probably not at this meeting, and might just distribute it to you, and you can see whether you want to go any further with it.
Thank you. Are there any further, I'm conscious of the time, are there any further comments or feedback on the financial summary?
I'll move the recommendation, Mr.
Thank
Chair.
you. Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Deputy Halale. So then could I ask put motion to the committee? All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Motion carried. On the basis of our agreement to move public excluded to item 3.2 earlier, we now no longer need to have agenda items 6, 7, 8 or 9. And on that basis, I declare the meeting closed. Thank you.